Join me in welcoming James to the stage. James Hall.
Thank you very much.
Wow,
Here we are.
quite a few fans there.
After a few too many pints, perhaps.
That's all good. So I guess we'll start with the same thing again, really. If you mind, introduce yourself to the audience and kind of tell them what you do.
Sure. So I'm James. I'm from an agency called Parallax. We've got a few of the lads here. Yeah. They're basically just trying to rinse the bar for whatever they can.
It's fine.
So we do digital. We're a web shop. We do all sorts of exciting stuff. We've been going about 3.5 years now. 4 even. Is that Lawrence?
That's a heckler.
Yeah, it's going really well. Yeah, there's going to be 20 of us, I think.
That's quite good.
Yeah, that's all right.
All right, yeah. So we're going to talk a bit more about open source and licensing and that kind of stuff in a little bit. But I thought it might be a good idea to start with how you first got into programming and how you got interested in computers and so on.
Yeah, sure. So from quite a young age, I was a bit of an odd child. So when people were outside playing football, I was quite into the old, computers and that.
Yeah.
So from about 8, I managed to get this computer from one of my mum's friends, and it was this old sort of black green screen computer, this apricot IBM clone. It's fucking shit. And
Where it all started.
Yeah, that's where it all started. So my mates down the street are coming to call on me saying, "You get playing out?" And nah, I'm just gonna stay in and do the computers. So the floppy drive was completely knacked. So what I had to do is I had to go down to the library and get out programming books.
Right.
I started with BASIC.
Okay.
Any BASIC programmers?
Yeah, BASIC really lasted quite well. So.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we've got many programmers in the audience, have we? Oh, a couple. Yeah, that's all right then.
There you go.
Yeah, so I started with BASIC. So I basically had to punch all these programs. It's mostly games that I was interested in.
Yeah.
I wanted, like everybody, wanted to be a games programmer when I grew up. So I'd be typing all these games into the computer and like really struggling with it and trying to figure out what the fuck's going on. But yeah, that's basically what drew me into it. And I just went from there, really.
And back then there was no copy and pasting really around. It was solely learning from typing into it and not being lazy really.
Yeah. So going back to what the other guy said, you just nick stuff off people and just play around with it. And basically typing stuff from the books really teaches you how it all fits together. So at first you've got no idea what you're doing. It's just the letters and numbers match up. It's all the same. But as you start playing with the numbers and making different graphics come up on the screen, you start getting an understanding of how it all fits together.
Yeah, sure.
And it just goes from there, and basically
Escalated a bit.
It escalates a bit, yeah.
So that doesn't sound like the kind of thing you'd be doing in school much, really.
So I went through school not really paying much attention, staying up late at night programming, and I just didn't take any interest in any of the subjects. So by the time it came towards the end of secondary school, I was mostly fucking up most of my exams because I'd be up all night programming, and then at school I'd basically be asleep. So that went a bit badly for me. My teachers were saying, "Look, you're really bright. Look, you could do better than this. This is a stepping stone to university."
Yeah.
And I wasn't interested, but they convinced me to sign on to go to college.
Yep.
And that lasted about a week.
and what just obviously wasn't suited to your style.
No, so once I started college, I realised that you could get into nightclubs at that age.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool. So I actually, the reason they knew I dropped out is I met this guy who was in Ziggy's, and he was like, "Mate, you haven't been at college for like ages." Like, yeah,
and the fact that you were in a nightclub was probably a bit of a giveaway that you.
Yeah, that's it. So yeah, I'm not doing that anymore. So I ended up working at this digital agency in York called Brightfi.
Yep.
And they're proper cool. So I was working 3 days a week there, and then the other 4 days I was learning stuff in my own time, stealing other people's stuff, and playing around with it, and drinking beer. And that's when I really started learning about web technology, JavaScript, and really getting into sort of web dev.
So it all started with just hacking away, whilst drinking heavily.
Yeah.
And you still do that today, don't you?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. I'll just let you finish it.
Thanks.
So jumping forward a few years, your kind of primary language of choice isn't BASIC anymore, or QBasic.
No, I've moved on from BASIC
Yeah.
to a more primitive language, JavaScript.
Yeah.
Yeah, JavaScript's sort of coming into its own at the minute, I think, especially with sort of Node.js and all the rest of it. But
Yeah.
I'm really into the JS at the minute.
And yeah, so why JavaScript over any other language? You know, there's obviously a lot of languages out there that people use to script in.
JS was important because you could use it in your MySpace profile for those, you know, those things that follow your cursor around, like little stars and shit.
Lead hacking.
Yeah, all that. But you could basically use it on any computer. So you could go to school, you could fire up Notepad, you could hack out some code, and it would run wherever you were. And at the time, it was still very much sort of a joke language. There was dynamic drive, like DHTML was a buzzword. This is before Ajax existed as a thing. But yeah, that's when I really got into it. But since then, it's really come into its own.
Yeah. And alongside that, what other stuff are you using at the moment? I know you use PHP quite heavily at Parallax.
Yeah, we use a lot of PHP. So that was a technology I started using back at Bright5. It's just really well suited for the web.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of bad PHP programs out there.
Gets a lot of stick, doesn't it? But
yeah, about 95% of PHP programmers are shit.
Yeah. It's quite a high percentage.
And then the rest of them work at Parallax, and they're all awesome. Yeah.
Cornered the market nicely.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so probably a good time to start talking about your open source projects. Should we go from the very first successful project, and then we'll come to current day?
Yeah, sure. So the first successful open source project that I did was a project called Googlepedia, which was basically an idea that came to me when I tried to write an ad blocker for Google.
Right.
And I'd taken the adverts off the right-hand side, and I was thinking, there's a heck of a lot of gap on the right there.
Yeah.
So what I did was I injected a Wikipedia page in there, and each of the links inside the Wikipedia article would trigger another Google search. So it was a really cool research tool to sort of get round stuff.
Yeah.
And that really caught on. So we had 500,000 downloads, and then we featured in CNET. I don't know if you know download.com, but that's where everyone went to get shit apps on, download Kazaa and stuff. But yeah, it really took off and had like loads of people using it every day. And then Google Code came along, stuck it up on there, and people started fixing stuff that I'd written that was shit. And they told me why it was shit, and that's really useful as a learning tool, because what you don't get when you're working on your own is you don't get the feedback that you need to improve.
Yeah.
So you'll do something in the way that is obvious to you.
Yeah.
Without really thinking about how can I put a bit more effort in here and actually make it a bit better.
Yeah, sure. And there was a lot of activity on that project. Even on Google Code, there was, I think you said there was 14 languages that had been added to this extension and all sorts. So.
Yeah, so they added a load of different languages to it, and the community helped me fight against Google changing their AdWords code all the time.
Right. So keeping up with when they were trying to make your project not work.
Yeah. Oh, I think they were just playing around with different advert ideas, and trying to stop ad blockers, obviously.
Yeah, obviously a large source of their revenue. So
yeah.
I'm sure you were their best friend.
Yeah. So 6 years later was probably my last release of that project, and then Google implemented a feature called Knowledge Graph, is where you put a Google search in, and you get your Google results on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you get a Wikipedia article.
Right.
Yeah, so it's pretty similar.
That's very calm of you to.
Yeah, the proper fucking nicked it.
Yeah. So they stole your idea. Let's move on from that one.
Yeah, sure.
Google Code was obviously a big deal there. Helped a lot of the open source collaboration kind of take place.
Yeah.
The other stuff that you used at the same time was Cake PHP and other. Did you contribute to Cake PHP?
Yeah, so I was quite a big contributor to Cake PHP back in the day. This is when everyone was starting to use Ruby on Rails.
Yeah.
And PHP was like, shit, we need to be cool as well. And so there was a one project called PHP on Tracks, which is completely dead now. And then it was absolutely wank. And then there was all these different Ruby on Rails clones.
Yeah.
One of them was Cake PHP, and I contributed to that quite heavily because I wanted a cool thing like the ORM you get in Ruby and all the rest of it that goes with it.
Yeah.
And this is before PHP had proper object-oriented programming.
Yeah.
So yeah, it sort of went from there really. But the community is really helpful in sort of bringing on your skills, and like you can stick a bug fix into a project or a feature, and the community will just take it into release after release after release.
Yeah.
So there's stuff I've written years and years and years ago that is still in latest Cake Core or various other projects that I've contributed to.
And this was even before the days of GitHub, really. This was before,
This is before GitHub.
So SVN and all that kind of stuff.
You had to email your patches in or use Track and attach a diff file. But yeah, it was hard work to get a patch into a project. It's so much easier with GitHub these days.
Yeah, definitely. So that brings us to JS-PDF, which is it wasn't on GitHub originally, but it's obviously thrived into a big project now on GitHub.
Yeah, sure. So that was 2009.
Yeah.
It came about because on Stack Overflow I saw these guys struggling with trying to generate portable document formats files in JavaScript. People were saying, "What the fuck are you on about? That's not possible."
Yeah.
And I thought, well, maybe it is. Maybe I can do that. So that's where the library spun up from. Loads of people started contributing to it, and now Adobe are using it. AT&T have been using it for invoicing applications.
Yep.
It's sort of taken its own sort of life, really.
It was possible.
Yeah, it was possible.
So that started from you just wanting to prove them wrong.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, and now it's got over 3,500 stars on GitHub, and I guess the same kind of patterns happening with that. Obviously a lot of people. I remember we were talking the other day, and you mentioned that they'd implemented the image. I can't remember exactly what it was. The image functionality with.
Oh yeah, someone just rocked up with this huge, massive patch, and he was like, "This implements SVG rendering," and I was like, "You are fucking mental. How have you done this?"
That's proper hard.
Proper weenie hard, yeah.
Okay, so we'll just touch on the last project that you've got at the moment, which is VTOP.
Yeah.
What is VTOP?
VTOP is it's a graphical sort of activity monitor, I guess.
Yep.
It was there. I built it to scratch and itch in a couple of days, and the code was really shockingly shit.
Yeah.
And I think Barnaby tried to implement an extra feature to it, and then I realised that I might have to rewrite it again. They always say build one to throw away, but then you rarely do.
Yeah.
This really needed throwing away.
So you took it away and started from scratch, built it?
Built it from scratch, added some plugin architecture to it, put it on Reddit, and then it got completely slated. So hundreds of people told me that I was an idiot, that I shouldn't have written it in JavaScript.
Yep.
But that's the kind of good feel you get from the open source community. Yeah. So it's not all good,
Yeah. We'll get to that. So, I mean, motivations for writing open source, apart from being trolled on Reddit,
Yeah, so the motivation for open source really is, it really plays on your intrinsic motivations, I think. So it's very different from being paid money to do something. If you come up with an idea and you want to go for it,
yep.
If you're in control of your own destiny, you almost want it that much more. It's the same kind of satisfaction you get when you're cooking a meal for friends or you're doing something that feels worthwhile. It's completely different from being paid cash to do something.
Yeah.
And that's the power that you can harness through open source. So if you contribute to somebody else's project, they'll take that patch and they'll carry it on, and there'll be people that are working day jobs that are doing ridiculously complex things, and they'll come home at night and they'll work for free on the code that you've submitted, and that seems completely ridiculous, but it happens.
But in a way, it's just another hobby, isn't it? It's still coding, obviously, and maybe people that'll get frowned upon a little bit, but it's just another hobby.
It is just another hobby, but it has built great things. I mean, look at Wikipedia, for example. You've got professors that work all day, and in their relatively little spare time, they'll plow it into writing articles about the subjects that they know and love. And that's really powerful. That if you said 20 years ago that there was going to be this huge thing and everyone was going to work for free and they were going to give it away for free and it would, Encarta would go away even though it had that really cool game thing.
Yeah.
You wouldn't believe me, but it's happened.
Yeah. I mean, are there any other positive sides that you think, obviously that's the fact that you get something out of it and the people who are using that software get a lot out of it as well, but do you think there's anything else that's kind of a positive side to open source which people enjoy?
Definitely. So it's the whole learning experience. So other programmers are quite critical of other programmers, especially online. So if you post something that's shit, you'll know about it straight away. Yeah. Whereas if I showed you some code, you might go, yeah, that's nice. That's all right. Really. Yeah. You bite your tongue a bit. But open source, you can't get away with it. So if you write something shit, you will be told quite quickly.
And there's that kind of pride, I guess, because people want to use that code and use that maybe in commercial projects. So it can't be shit.
Exactly, yeah. And when a big company picks up an open source project, you'll find some of their best devs fixing your shit in their work time, which is perfect. It's like free dev.
That's a good sales pitch.
Yeah.
Negative sides, though. I know you mentioned the Reddit incident where you got you got slated, didn't you? Really?
Yeah. So I don't mind so much the slating. Yeah. One negative side is the support side. So with commercial software, you do get very good support.
Yeah.
Generally, you don't get that as much with open source, but you get it in a different way. So Stack Overflow, as you know, is really good. I mean, what's your experience been of using open source projects?
It's been fantastic. I mean, thanks for that.
Yeah, I just thought I'd drop you in it. You can have some more pint.
Yeah. No, it's the same as you really. I mean, I think writing open source is a really enjoyable thing. You get a lot out of it, but also I think when you come to start a new project, I mean, having these building blocks to basically save you a hell of a lot of time, and a lot of the client projects we work on is built on Rails and built on a lot of these open source bricks like Ruby Gems, which is just people's time solving hard problems for you.
You can just hit the ground running, can't you?
Basically, yeah, and you can focus on what the target of the project is. So a lot of the stuff is basic things that you just need to keep writing again and again and again.
Yeah, I guess the real point is you're not reinventing the wheel every time, so you can pick bits and pieces up. And if you're picking up these sort of newish projects, when something goes wrong, it's really useful to be able to dive into the code and figure out what they've done wrong, so that you can either work around it or fix it.
Yeah.
Whereas with commercial software, if that fucks up, I mean, it's very rare with like mature development platforms like Microsoft stuff.
Yeah.
Like it's very rare that you'll find a bug that you can't work around. But in the very, very slight chance that it does happen, you're fucked.
Yeah.
So you have to wait for the next cycle for that to be fixed, and that can be a big problem.
Yeah, I mean, it ends up costing you potentially more time in that case.
Yeah, absolutely, and money. So
yeah. Exactly. So you talked about the commercial applications of open source. The one reason why I bring up is because you were kind of hired to do some commercial work on JSPDF.
Yeah, so some of the features in JSPDF have been commissioned. That's pretty good going. I mean, it was way back now, but all the sort of line drawing stuff I didn't think could be useful, but somebody did, and I added that in, and then off the back of that, people have built like table plugins and all the rest of it. So,
which I guess is where the frameworks for invoicing software comes in and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so that's where I guess AT&T picked it up, and companies like that, because it is useful for invoicing, because you don't want the shitty browser prints out a header and footer
with page numbers on all
that crap, which is fine if you're printing an event ticket, but if you're printing something that you're sending out as a company,
if you send out a fat invoice, you don't want it to look crap, do you?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. So let's just talk a bit about licensing, because I know you have quite an opinion on licensing itself, and you're quite preferable to MIT. I know you're not such a fan of GPL. Maybe you could just talk us through why MIT.
Yeah, sure. So I don't know how many of you out there know the difference between MIT and GPL. None of you?
Awesome.
Fuck. This is going to be a really interesting segment then.
Yeah,
so MIT is basically you just give it away and you can do what the fuck you want with it. So if you're a company, you can add bits of code to it. You can do what you want. GPL, if you change the code, you need to send that code back up. You need to send it back to them if you distribute it. And what happens in that instance is either companies lie and say that they haven't used GPL,
Yep.
or they just decide not to use open source at all. So licenses like GPL scare companies off the whole open source thing altogether. So their legal department's like, fuck.
Because they're committing, aren't they? They're committing to that contract almost.
Yeah, and the lawyers don't understand it, and a lot of open source contracts haven't been put together by professionals.
Yeah.
So businesses are really losing out when their legal department starts getting a bit scared, because
Yeah.
there are ways that you can incorporate it.
I guess the problem is that people don't see that it's open source in that context is a bit of a head start, because you've got a starting point for whatever that is doing, right?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's not completely black and white, so you don't have to go all open source or all proprietary.
Yeah.
You can have a mix. It just scares the shit out of people when they don't understand the differences between the different licenses.
Yeah. I mean, if you the problem is that I guess Parallax and Stack as well, we use a lot of open source software and we see the benefits, but how do you think that's kind of sold to larger corporations, you know, commercial, you know? I know quite a lot of large companies that do use open source software mixed with Microsoft software. I mean,
Yeah.
how does that even get implemented? Surely people are thinking, I can't use open source because it's not supported.
Yeah, I mean, you just need to be upfront with your clients, I guess, about that. I mean, a lot of the clients we work with just trust us to know the tech stack is solid.
Yeah.
But I think it's just absolutely fine. It's cheaper for them at the end of the day. If they want to take the code and it's based on open source stuff, then it's safer from their point of view.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's the point, isn't it? I mean, it's very rare that you do need to just package it all up and run off with your source code. It doesn't really matter how much of that you actually own.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what's your experience with open source and giving it to?
Thanks again.
I'm trying to get you back in on this particular topic.
I think it's for the same reasons as before. Really, I think it is quite. The problem comes when you have a client that wants something implementing that they would consider very, very niche and specific to their product. So
that's a good point. Yeah,
it's very much IP. So in that case, it wouldn't be beneficial to open source it, because first of all, it might not be useful to other people, but also, you know, it's basically the only thing that sets them apart. Not the only thing, obviously. Being good at business helps, but
because I know a recent project you worked on was quite heavily open source based.
Yeah, so the NHS one was fantastic, and there's still aspirations to open source that, and you know, it's up to the powers that be. But I think that's been approached as an open source project, and there's definitely stuff in there that's going to be really useful to the community, you know, large community.
Yeah, and to other parts of the NHS or other government agencies.
Well, that's the mad thing. It's that big that they'll probably be doing their own little versions of it. So, you know, if that can be shared in one way or another, whether it's not through the same contract but through open source, then that's even better.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you see a lot of that with government in America and health services in America, where they are actually putting tools together, open sourcing it, and sharing, because of all the red tape that usually exists between departments.
Yeah.
That all disappears with open source.
Yeah, they're circumventing the usual approaches and just kind of putting it out there and hoping the rest of the departments see it.
Yeah, I think there's a big potential to help a lot of people through software, and I think people just need to wake up to that a bit.